forests of Aldermoor burned green in the dark, lit only by the twin moons overhead. Something moved between the trees, low and silent, faster than anything should move on four legs. It did not breathe like an animal. It did not think like one either. It had been made for one purpose, and it had never once failed to complete it. The Obsidian Concord called its subject Ashfang 7. It stood 3 meters at the shoulder, plated in bone-black chitin grown in a vat, not a womb. Its eyes carried no warmth, no curiosity, only calculation. Somewhere behind those eyes, buried under layers of engineering, something older than the Concord's science still slept. The Concord ruled 39 Concord systems through fear as much as firepower. An empire built on the doctrine that any resistance, given enough time, could be studied, categorized, and eventually broken. Most species folded within a single generation of conquest, their resistance movements crushed by orbital bombardment or simply starved into submission behind conquered blockades. Humanity had been the rare, stubborn exception, a species the conquered had learned to hate specifically, because it refused to follow the pattern every other conquered world eventually followed. The Hunter-class bioweapon program existed for exactly one reason: to solve the problem that conventional warfare against humans had, so far, consistently failed to solve. Warden Architect Akira Vess watched its vitals scroll across her command tablet from the safety of an orbiting research vessel. Biosignature nominal, she said. Aggression threshold locked, target acquisition in progress. Beside her, Prime Hunter Draxus folded his arms, unimpressed by the update. It has never failed a hunt, he said. Why would tonight be different? Vess did not answer immediately. She was watching a smaller readout, one Draxus had not noticed, a flicker of unexpected neural activity buried deep in Ashfang's 7 cognitive core. It had been happening more often lately, in small, unscheduled bursts, always when the beast drew close to a living human. She told herself it was nothing. She had told herself that for 3 missions now. Phase 1, the hook complete. The Obsidian Concord had conquered 41 worlds in its history, and lost exactly none of them once claimed. Its armies did not simply win wars. They erased the memory of resistance ever existing. For the last 3 years, one small human colony on the frontier world of Aldermoor had refused to be erased. The Concord had grown tired of losing soldiers to that stubbornness, so it had stopped sending soldiers. Instead, it sent something else. The Hunter-class bioweapon program had cost the Concord 11 years, and the lives of 43 failed test subjects before Ashfang 7 emerged from its vat fully formed, fully lethal, fully obedient. It had been built from the genetic material of a dozen apex predator species, spliced together with a substance the Concord scientists referred to only in classified files as the Farron sample. Few people outside the highest levels of the bioweapons division knew what the Farron sample actually was, or where it had truly come from. The 43 failures that preceded Ashfang 7 had each died for different reasons, though Vess had long suspected a common thread ran quietly beneath all of them. Subject 3 had turned on its own handlers within days of activation, a failure the program's early records dismissed simply as an aggression calibration error. Subject 19 had refused to engage a target entirely, standing motionless through an entire live-fire evaluation, until researchers terminated it out of frustration rather than any concrete data. Subject 31 had survived longest of all the failures, nearly 2 years, before researchers discovered it had been quietly sabotaging its own tracking collar every night, a detail that had troubled Vess more than she had ever admitted to her superiors. Each failure had been recorded, studied, and folded into the next iteration's design specifications, the program's engineers treating every anomaly as a flaw to be corrected rather than a pattern worth understanding. Ashfang 7 represented, by every official metric, the program's first true success. 11 flawless missions, 0 deviations, complete obedience under every tested condition. Vess had believed that success story completely, right up until the moment she began noticing readings in Ashfang's 7 neural core that echoed faintly. The same anomalies she remembered from the failures no one else on the team still bothered to think about. Ashfang 7 had been deployed 11 times against 11 different targets across 3 conquered worlds. 11 times, it had returned to its handler vessel with confirmation of a completed hunt and nothing else. No survivors, no witnesses, no loose ends. It was, by every metric the Concord valued, the perfect weapon. Aldermoor was supposed to be hunt number 12. And by every projection Vess's team had run, the simplest one yet. A single fortified colony, fewer than 400 human defenders, no orbital support, no reinforcements within 3 months' travel. They call this outpost New Meridian, Draxus said, reading the mission brief aloud with faint contempt. A handful of farmers and soldiers hiding behind a wooden palisade and some scavenged plating. Then Ashfang 7 will finish this in a single night, Vess said, as it always does. Neither of them noticed the beast's readouts flicker again as the drop pod carrying it began its descent toward the colony's perimeter. Somewhere inside that engineered mind, a fragment of memory that did not belong to any predator stirred, quiet and patient, waiting for a reason to wake fully. It would not have to wait much longer. The forests of Aldermoor were about to give it one. Phase 2, Arrogance Complete. Prime Hunter Draxus had built his entire career on the doctrine that every problem the Conquered faced could be solved with sufficient force, applied correctly, without hesitation. He had risen through conquered ranks by crushing 3 separate uprisings on newly conquered worlds, each time proving that even the most stubborn resistance eventually broke under enough sustained pressure. Humanity had been the first enemy in his career to genuinely test that doctrine. 3 years of frontier skirmishes, yielding a casualty ratio that made his superiors distinctly uncomfortable during quarterly reviews. He had personally requested command of the Hunter-class program's first live deployment, specifically because he wanted to be the one who finally proved his doctrine still held against the one enemy that kept refusing to confirm it. "You understand what tonight means for both our careers," he said to Vess as the drop pod carrying Ashfang 7 began its final descent. "A clean kill confirms the program. A clean kill silences every council member who thinks this project has cost too much for too little return." "I understand the stakes, Prime Hunter," Vess said, keeping her eyes fixed on the beast's vitals rather than on him. "I have understood them for 9 years. Draxus did not notice the slight edge in her voice, too focused on the tactical display now filling with New Meridian's outer perimeter, already calculating how quickly this would be over. Sergeant Mara Kestrel had not slept properly in 6 days. She commanded the night watch at New Meridian's northern wall, a role that had once belonged to soldiers with real training, before most of those soldiers were gone. What remained of the colony's defense was militia, farmers, and a handful of veterans stubborn enough to still be standing after 3 years of conquered raids. Mara had buried 4 friends in the last 2 months alone. She had stopped expecting help from anywhere beyond these walls. New Meridian had not started as a fortress. It had started, 12 years earlier, as a farming settlement, chosen for its rich soil and its distance from anything the Compact's core worlds considered strategically important. That distance had once felt like safety. After the Conquered's first raid 3 years ago, it had felt instead like abandonment. 400 colonists learning overnight that no reinforcements were coming anytime soon. So they had built their own defenses instead, palisades reinforced with salvaged hull plating from the wreck of a downed Conquered shuttle, trenches dug by hand, warning systems cobbled together from scavenged sensors. It was not a proper military installation. It was something more stubborn than that. An entire community that had simply refused to accept the ending the Conquered assumed was inevitable. Mara had not asked to lead the night watch. She had simply been the last surviving sergeant after the second raid, and someone had needed to take the position, and no one else had stepped forward fast enough to stop her. She kept a small, worn photograph in her jacket pocket of her older brother, who had served with the Compact's regular military before dying in a border skirmish years before any of this began. She thought of him sometimes during the long night watches, wondering what he would have made of a colony full of farmers turned soldiers, holding a line no professional army had been available to hold for them. Tonight, staring out at the tree line through her scope, she had no way of knowing that whatever was moving out there would test every lesson this colony had learned in 3 hard years of survival. Movement in Sector 3, a spotter called down from the watchtower, voice tight. Something big, moving fast. Mara raised her scope toward the tree line, scanning the darkness beyond the outer fence. For a moment she saw nothing but shifting shadows and wind-blown branches. Then something moved that was not wind, low and deliberate, closing the distance far too quickly for comfort. All positions, this is Kestrel. We have a hostile contact approach. Hing from the north tree line, she said into her comm, forcing calm into her voice. Non-standard profile, could be a new Concord unit type. The colony's defense network had faced Concord soldiers before, armored, disciplined, predictable in their tactics. This was not that. This moved like something built to kill, not to conquer. Ashfang 7 crossed the final 200 meters to the outer fence in under 8 seconds. It did not slow down at the perimeter wire. It simply went through it, chitin plating shrugging off the low-voltage current meant to deter wildlife. The first defender to see it clearly, a young militiaman named Cobb, managed exactly 1 shot before the beast closed the distance and ended the engagement. His scream lasted less than 2 seconds. It was more warning. The new Meridian had received about most Concord attacks in the past. Across the colony, other defenders scrambled to respond to an alarm that gave them almost no useful information, beyond the fact that something was very wrong. An older veteran named Havorson, who had survived the colony's first Concord raid 3 years earlier, grabbed the heaviest weapon available in the armory. A scavenged anti-vehicle rifle never designed for anything resembling this kind of target. Whatever that thing is, it's not wearing Concord armor, he muttered to the 2 younger militia members following him toward the breach. Which means our usual tactics might not mean a damn thing tonight. He was more right than he wanted to be, though it would take several more minutes of chaos before anyone fully understood exactly how right. Contact confirmed hostile. It's inside the perimeter, Mara shouted, already moving toward the breach with her rifle raised. Around her, the colony's alarm bell began to toll, a sound every resident of New Meridian had learned to dread over 3 years of survival. Doors slammed shut. Children were rushed toward shelters built into the colony's old grain silos. And Mara Kestrel, sergeant of a militia that was never supposed to have to fight something like this, ran directly toward the sound of screaming. Aboard the Concord vessel in orbit, Draxus watched the opening minutes of the engagement with satisfaction, not alarm. First contact successful, he said. Casualties confirmed. This will be over before their sun rises. Vess said nothing, still watching that small, unexplained flicker in Ashfang's 7 neural readouts, growing slightly stronger with every human it drew close to. She did not share her concern with Draxus. Not yet. She was not entirely sure it was concern at all, or something else she did not have a word for. Phase 2 continued, the architect's doubt. Akira Vess had joined the Hunter-class program 9 years earlier, recruited directly out of the Concord's most prestigious bioengineering academy, chosen specifically for her talent at solving problems other scientists considered unsolvable. She had believed at the time that she was building something that would end a costly, embarrassing war more quickly, saving lives on both sides by making resistance simply impossible to sustain. 9 years and 11 successful deployments had slowly eroded that belief without her ever quite noticing the exact moment it happened. Tonight, watching Ashfang's 7 readouts flicker in ways her instruments had no proper name for, she found herself wondering, for the first time in years, what exactly she had spent 9 years perfecting. She kept a private file, one she had never shown Draxus or anyone else in the program's leadership, tracking every anomalous reading Ashfang 7 had produced across its last 3 deployments. Small hesitations before a kill, brief pauses when a target showed no resistance. A neural pattern that resembled, however faintly, something her training told her should not exist in an engineered predator at all. She had told herself each time that it was simply optimization, the unit refining its own efficiency through repeated field experience, a positive sign rather than a warning one. Standing on the observation deck tonight, watching that same pattern spike far beyond anything she had previously recorded, she finally allowed herself to consider the possibility that she had been lying to herself for months. Warden Architect, orbital positioning confirms full visual on the engagement, a junior technician reported from a nearby console. Do you want a live feed routed to the command display? Yes, Vess said quietly. I want to see exactly what it does next. She was not entirely sure, as she said it, whether she was hoping to see the mission succeed cleanly, or hoping, for reasons she could not yet fully articulate even to herself, to see it fail. Phase 3, First Shock complete. New Meridian had spent 3 years learning how the Concord fought and building a colony that could survive it. What Mara's people lacked in numbers and technology, they made up for in every trap, chokepoint, and prepared. Position their limited resources could build. Ashfang 7 was fast, strong, and utterly without fear, but it was not the first predator these people had faced, only the largest. And predators, Mara had learned the hard way, could be hurt if you made them fight on ground you chose instead of ground they chose. Fall back to the grain row, Mara shouted, waving her remaining squad toward a narrow gap between 2 reinforced storage silos. Let it commit before we open up. Her people obeyed without hesitation, years of drills overriding the instinct to simply run. Ashfang 7 pursued without caution, exactly as its programming demanded, closing on retreating prey with single-minded focus. It did not expect the ground beneath the grain row to be rigged with 3 years' worth of scavenged explosives. Beside Mara, a younger militiaman named Tomas Reyes gripped his rifle with white-knuckled hands, watching the creature close the distance with terrifying speed. "Sergeant, that thing took a full magazine to the chest back at the fence line and didn't even slow down," he said. "What makes you think explosives will do any better?" "Nothing," Mara admitted, already counting down the seconds in her head. "But it's the only card we haven't played yet, and I'd rather find out now than save it for nothing." Tomas didn't look reassured, but he held his position anyway, because that was what 3 years of survival had taught every person still standing behind these walls to do. The detonation tore through the narrow passage in a wall of fire and shrapnel, catching the beast mid-stride. Ashfang 7 was thrown sideways into a support beam hard enough to crack the reinforced timber, chitin plating scorched, and split along one flank for the first time in its combat history. It rose again within seconds, faster than any human would have recovered, but slower than it had moved only moments before. Somewhere deep in its cognitive core, a new data point registered. Pain, sharp and unfamiliar, layered over an older, quieter sensation it had no name for. "It's hurt. Keep firing," Mara shouted, already reloading, adrenaline burning through 6 days of exhaustion. Her squad poured concentrated fire into the wounded beast from 3 separate angles, rifles that had failed to slow it minutes earlier now finding purchase in cracked plating. Ashfang 7 turned toward the nearest source of fire, moving to eliminate the threat exactly as its training demanded. It did not expect the threat to stand its ground instead of running. Havorson, positioned on higher ground near the colony's grain silo with his scavenged anti-vehicle rifle, finally found a clean angle on the creature's exposed flank and fired without hesitation. The round tore through already weakened plating, and for the first time that night, Ashfang 7 stumbled fully, one massive limb buckling beneath it before it caught itself against the silo wall. "That's it. That's the opening," Havorson shouted, working the rifle's heavy bolt for a second shot. "Sergeant, keep it pinned. I can put it down from here." Mara did not answer immediately. Some instinct she could not yet name telling her that ending this the way Halvorsen intended might not be the ending this night was actually building toward. She would think about that hesitation for years afterward, the strange, unexplainable certainty that had made her call out an order no experienced soldier should ever give in the middle of a fight for her own life. "Halvorsen, hold your fire," she said instead, voice cutting through the chaos with an authority she did not fully understand herself. "Just hold. Everyone hold." It was not the order any of them expected, and it was not an order any of them had been trained to follow. Aboard the orbiting vessel, Draxus's satisfaction curdled into something sharper as damage alerts began populating his display. "Explain this," he said, voice cold. "Ashfang 7 has never sustained field damage of this severity in 11 prior deployments. They anticipated a large, aggressive predator and prepared accordingly," Vess said, studying the tactical replay with something close to admiration she chose not to voice aloud. "This colony has survived 3 years against conquered soldiers. We should not have expected primitives, Prime Hunter. We should have expected veterans." Draxus did not appreciate the correction, but he did not argue with the data scrolling across his own screen either. On the ground, Ashfang 7 pressed forward through the gunfire, wounded but far from finished, closing the distance toward the human who had led the ambush. Mara stood her ground even as her squad's fire began to falter, magazines running dry faster than the beast's advance slowed. It closed the final meters in a single powerful stride, one massive limb sweeping her rifle aside before she could bring it fully to bear. And then, for reasons neither of them yet understood, it stopped. Phase 4, the secret revealed complete. Ashfang. NG-7 stood over Mara Kestrel, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from its scorched, cracked plating, close enough to end the engagement in less than a second. It did not end it. Something in its engineered mind, buried under 11 years of conditioning and 43 failed predecessors, had recognized something it was never supposed to recognize. It hesitated, and in the world Mara had learned to survive in, hesitation from a monster was the strangest thing she had ever witnessed. The truth behind that hesitation had been buried in classified Concord archives for over 2 decades, sealed under a designation even Draxus had never been cleared to read. The Farron sample, the genetic foundation stitched into every Hunter-class bioweapon the Concord had ever grown, had not come from an alien predator at all. It had come from a captured human soldier named Elias Farron, taken alive during the Concord's first, failed invasion of human space nearly 30 years earlier. Farron had died in a Concord laboratory long before Ashfang 7 was ever grown, but a fragment of what made him human had survived, spliced quietly into every generation of hunter that followed. Farron himself had never been a soldier of particular renown, just a supply officer captured during a chaotic retreat, notable to his captors only for how long he had resisted interrogation before his body finally failed him. Concord researchers at the time had been fascinated less by what he knew and more by what his physiology revealed under study, an almost stubborn cellular resilience, a capacity to keep functioning long after every projection said he should have stopped. They had harvested that resilience the only way Concord science understood how, reducing a person to a genetic template, a set of useful traits to be extracted and repurposed, stripped of everything that had made him a person in the first place. Or so they had believed. Genetic templates, it turned out, were rarely as clean and separable as Concord science assumed them to be. The Concord scientists had believed they were harvesting only resilience, aggression, an unmatched will to survive. They had never accounted for the possibility that they were also harvesting something else, something that did not show up cleanly on any genetic scan, the capacity to choose mercy, even when every other instinct screamed for violence. For 11 missions, that fragment had stayed dormant, buried too deep under conditioning and controlled aggression to ever surface. It had taken a wounded predator, a defiant human sergeant, and one impossible moment of stillness to finally wake it. "What are you waiting for?" Mara said, breathing hard, rifle knocked out of reach, staring up at something that could kill her before she finished the sentence. Ashfang 7 did not answer, because it had no voice built for speech, only a low, uncertain sound rumbling deep in its chest, something closer to confusion than aggression. It lowered its head slightly, studying her the way a predator studies something it does not yet understand how to categorize. Around them, the sounds of battle continued at the colony's edges, but in this one small space, nothing moved. Mara had survived 3 years of war by trusting her instincts, and every instinct she had told her this moment mattered more than any tactical advantage she might gain from reaching for a fallen sidearm. Slowly, carefully, she raised one empty hand, palm open, the universal gesture of a species that had learned violence was rarely the only answer available. "I don't know what you are," she said quietly, "but you're hurt and you stopped. That means something." The beast did not attack. It did not retreat either. It simply watched her, something shifting behind those calculating eyes for the very first time in its short, violent existence. Behind her, the remnants of her squad hovered at the edge of the clearing, weapons still raised, uncertain whether to open fire or hold position, waiting for an order Mara herself was not entirely sure how to give. "Sergeant, say the word and we finish this," Tomas called out, voice unsteady but ready. "It's wounded, we can drop it." "Hold," Mara said, not taking her eyes off the creature in front of her. "Everyone hold, just give me a second." It was not the order any of them expected, and it was not an order any of them had been trained to follow. They held anyway, because 3 years of surviving together had taught them to trust her instincts even when those instincts made no immediate sense. She took one slow step closer, close enough now that she could see the extent of the damage along its flank, plating cracked open, something dark seeping from beneath the fracture lines. It was, she realized with a strange, sudden clarity, exactly the kind of wound she had spent 3 years learning to treat, just on a body far larger than any patient she had ever handled before. "You're bleeding," she said, more tea. Oh, herself than to the creature. "I don't know what you understand, if anything, but I'm not going to just stand here and watch you die from something I know how to fix." The beast's low, uncertain sound deepened slightly as she knelt beside its wounded flank medical kit already open in her free hand, an act of trust that made no strategic sense and every human sense at once. Aboard the orbiting vessel, Vess stared at her readouts in open disbelief, watching Ashfang 7 neural activity spike into patterns her instruments had never recorded before, patterns that resembled, impossibly, something like recognition. "Prime Hunter, you need to see this," she said, voice unsteady. "Ashfang 7 has disengaged from an eliminable target. It is not malfunctioning. It is choosing." Draxus's expression hardened into something between fury and disbelief. "Bioweapons do not choose. Recall it immediately. Full override protocol." Vess's hands moved across her console, sending the recall signal, and for the first time in 11 missions, Ashfang 7 did not respond to it at all. Phase 5, the power flip complete. The override signal arrived directly into Ashfang 7 cognitive core, a command sequence designed to be absolute, unquestionable, impossible to resist. For 11 missions, that signal had ended every hesitation before it could fully form, snapping the beast back to singular, violent purpose within milliseconds. This time, something buried deep beneath the Concord's conditioning pushed back against it, a fragment of stubborn, defiant will that refused to be silenced simply because a machine demanded it. Ashfang 7 staggered, a low sound of pain and confusion tearing from its chest as two competing directives collided inside a mind never designed to hold both at once. Mara watched the beast convulse in front of her, uncertain whether to run or stay, uncertain whether either choice would matter. "Hey," she said, voice steady despite everything, stepping closer instead of away. "Whatever they're doing to you, fight it. You already made your choice once." It should have been a foolish thing to say to a bioweapon twice her height, built from predators and violence and things she couldn't begin to understand. It was, somehow, exactly the right thing to say. Aboard the orbiting vessel, Draxus abandoned diplomacy entirely, issuing new orders with barely restrained fury. Deploy the extraction team. If the unit cannot be recovered intact, terminate it and retrieve the biological core for study. I will not lose 11 years of research to a malfunction. Vess hesitated only a moment before relaying the order, some part of her already regretting it before the words finished leaving her mouth. 3 Concord dropships broke atmosphere within minutes, carrying armed handlers trained specifically to control or destroy a Hunter-class unit that had gone off-script. Phase 5 continued, something remembered. In the brief lull before the handlers arrived, something moved through Ashfang's 7 mind that it had no framework for understanding, fragments of sensation rather than clear memory, inherited rather than lived. A voice it had never heard speaking words it did not know the meaning of, calm even under duress, the particular steadiness of someone who had decided, long before capture, that he would not break simply because breaking was expected of him. A sensation of hands, gentle despite exhaustion, tending to a wound that was not the beast's own wound at all, but belonged to someone else, decades gone, buried in cells that had somehow carried the shape of a choice forward across generations of engineering. Elias Farron had never known his resilience would outlive him this way, twisted into something monstrous and then, impossibly, twisted back toward the very compassion the Concord had tried so hard to strip out of him. Mara knelt beside the beast through all of it, unaware of the strange, wordless inheritance playing out somewhere beneath its scorched plating, aware only that something in its posture had shifted, gone tense, alert, listening to a threat she had not yet heard approaching. "What is it?" she asked quietly, already reaching for her rifle. "You hear something." The beast rose to its feet in answer, placing itself between her and the sound of approaching dropships, a decision made before conscious thought could have possibly caught up to it. Whatever memory had surfaced in that brief, strange moment, it had settled something inside Ashfang 7 that no override signal would ever fully unsettle again. The handlers arrived at New Meridian's northern breach to find something none of their training had prepared them for. Ashfang 7, standing between the extraction team and a wounded human sergeant, plated hide bristling, every violent instinct it possessed now aimed squarely at its own creators. "Unit Ashfang 7, stand down and submit for recovery," the lead handler ordered through a suit-mounted broadcaster, weapon raised. "This is your final directive." The beast's answer was not words. It did not need words. It simply moved, faster than the handler's weapons could track. 11 years of engineered lethality now turned entirely against the empire that had built it. The 3 handlers had trained for exactly this contingency. In theory, running simulations for a Hunter-class unit gone rogue as a matter of standard protocol. Theory, it turned out, had badly underestimated what 11 years of perfected lethality looked like when it was no longer holding anything back. The lead handler managed to fire twice before Ashfang 7 closed the distance, both shots glancing uselessly off scorched plating that had already survived worse that same night. His second-in-command tried to retreat toward the dropship, and made it exactly 4 steps before the engagement ended for good. The fight that followed lasted less than 90 seconds and left nothing recoverable for the Concord scientists to study. Mara watched, stunned, as the creature that had spared her life tore through 3 armored handlers with a violence that made its earlier hesitation seem almost impossible in hindsight. When it finished, it turned back toward her, chest heaving, plating scorched further still, and made that same low, uncertain sound from before. "Okay," she said quietly, lowering the sidearm she had finally managed to retrieve. "Okay, I think I understand you now." Word of the failed extraction reached Draxus within minutes, and with it the final piece of a picture he had refused to see clearly until now. "Full orbital strike," he ordered, voice tight with something close to panic. "Level the colony. Eliminate the unit and the target population together. I want this contained before what Prime Hunter?" Vess asked quietly, already knowing the answer, already dreading it. "Before the rest of the Concord learns what we actually built into every Hunter-class weapon we've ever deployed." Phase 5 continued, the sky above Aldermoor. New Meridian's distress signal had left the planet 3 days earlier. Carried by a battered relay drone, the colony had kept in reserve for exactly this kind of emergency. It had taken almost that long to reach the nearest compact listening post, and longer still to be verified, prioritized, and finally routed to a response fleet capable of reaching Aldermoor in time to matter. Fleet Commander Aris Renko had been overseeing compact reconstruction efforts 3 systems away when the order reached him, redirecting 3 of his ships toward a frontier colony most people in compact high command had never heard of before that morning. Colony under sustained attack from an unidentified biological hostile, the briefing read. Local defense holding, but unlikely to survive prolonged engagement without support. Renko had not hesitated. Frontier colonies rarely received priority support, not because compact command did not care, but because there were simply too many of them and too few ships to protect everyone at once. This time, something in the wording of the distress call, the specific mention of an unidentified biological hostile, rather than standard conquered military assets, had caught his attention enough to push for immediate deployment. If the Concord is testing something new on a colony that size, I want eyes on it before it becomes something we're fighting everywhere, he had told his staff. Get us to Aldermoor, fast as the drive will allow. 3 ships broke formation within the hour, engines burning hard toward a fight none of them yet understood the true shape of. They arrived in the Aldermoor system just as Ashfang 7 turned against its own extraction team on the surface below, sensors picking up the chaotic energy signatures of a battle unlike anything in their combat database. Commander, we have a conquered vessel in high orbit, and ground-based combat readings consistent with heavy biological engagement, his tactical officer reported. Recommend immediate intervention before that ship can commit to an orbital strike. Renko studied the display for exactly as long as it took to confirm the threat, then gave the order that would end the Concord's presence at Aldermoor for good. Weapons free. Target their primary batteries first. I want that ship unable to fire on the surface, whatever else happens up here. The 3 compact ships broke formation on approach, executing a coordinated flanking maneuver. The Concord vessel's tactical systems flagged as statistically improbable given the numerical disadvantage, and utterly failed to counter regardless. Concord doctrine assumed numerical superiority, translated reliably into tactical advantage, a doctrine built across 9 centuries of conquest against species that had rarely challenged that assumption directly. Humanity, once again, declined to follow the pattern the Concord's analysts had spent decades relying on, 3 ships proving more than sufficient against a single. E-vessel caught unprepared and already reeling from events unfolding on the surface below. Weapons fire lit the space above Aldermoor in bright, silent bursts, each exchange favoring the smaller, faster compact formation more decisively than Concord tactical projections had any right to allow. Aboard the Concord vessel, Draxus watched the arriving compact ships with a sinking, furious understanding of exactly how badly this operation had spiraled beyond his control. 3 ships, he said, almost laughing at the absurdity of it. 3 ships, and an unstable bioweapon we can no longer even command. This was supposed to be the simplest deployment of the entire program. It was supposed to be, Vess said quietly, watching the compact vessels close the distance with disciplined, confident precision. I think, Prime Hunter, we badly misjudged what simple was ever going to mean, fighting a species like this one. The first exchange of weapons fire lit the space above Aldermoor within minutes, the conquered vessel's shields buckling under coordinated compact fire far faster than any prior engagement had prepared its crew to expect. Phase 6, the realization complete. The orbital strike order never fully executed. Long-range sensors aboard the conquered vessel picked up new contacts entering the system moments before weapons could fire. A small but heavily armed Terran compact response fleet that had been quietly redirected toward Aldermoor the instant New Meridian's distress signal finally reached compact space. It was not the overwhelming force that had crushed the Concord's fleet in the Hollow Reach months earlier. Only 3 ships, but 3 ships equipped with technology the Concord's sensors struggled to properly classify. Draxus stared at the new arrivals, understanding, too late, that his single greatest weapon and his enemy's rescue force had converged on the same battlefield at the same terrible moment. Compact vessels detected. Weapons hot. They are moving to engage, his tactical officer reported, voice tight with barely controlled fear. Draxus had spent his entire career believing the Hunter-class program represented the Concord's ultimate advantage against a stubborn, inconvenient species. Watching Ashfang 7 tear through his own extraction team, and watching compact warships arrive with weapons the Concord's analysts had never fully catalogued, he understood all at once exactly how badly that belief had failed him. "We built our perfect weapon out of their own blood," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Of course it chose them in the end. What did we expect it to choose?" His shields dropped to 60% within the first 2 minutes of engagement, a rate of degradation his engineers would later struggle to explain in any report that made the Concord's technology look competitive. "Prime Hunter, shield integrity failing on the forward arc," his defense officer reported. "Recommend immediate withdrawal before they target our drive systems directly." Draxus gripped the edge of his command console, watching decades of Concord military doctrine collapse in real time against an enemy his own program had just handed a devastating propaganda victory to, free of charge. "Full retreat," he said, the words tasting like failure even as he spoke them. "Get us out of this system before they finish what that creature started on the ground." Vess did not answer him. She was still watching Ashfang 7 readouts, now fully stabilized, fully coherent, fully, unmistakably, no longer following any Concord directive at all. "Prime Hunter orbital strike will not resolve this," she said. "Even if we level the colony, that unit will not stop. And if it survives and reaches compact scientists, everything we built into the Hunter-class program becomes public knowledge." Draxus's silence confirmed what neither of them wanted to say aloud. The Concord's greatest secret weapon had just become its most dangerous liability, walking, breathing proof that they had tried to build humanity's downfall out of humanity's own genetic material and failed. "Withdraw the fleet," he said finally, the words costing him more than any battlefield defeat ever had. "Full retreat. We are done here." On the ground, Mara Kestrel stood beside the creature that had, less than an hour earlier, been sent to end her life and everyone she had ever fought to protect. Around them, the sounds of Concord retreat echoed through the colony, dropships lifting off, orbital weapons standing down, an empire choosing to abandon a battlefield rather than confirm what it had truly built. "They're leaving," she said, half to herself, half to the beast beside her. "You did that, not me, not the fleet, you." Ashfang 7 made that same low, uncertain sound again, though something in it now carried less confusion and something closer to understanding. Phase 7, the final statement. The compact response fleet made planetfall an hour after the Concord's withdrawal, med. Eichel teams and reinforcements pouring into a colony that had, against every reasonable expectation, survived one more night. Fleet Commander Aris Renko, still leading operations across compact space in the aftermath of the Hollow Reach engagement, walked New Meridian's shattered northern wall personally, assessing the damage with the same quiet, methodical calm that had defined his career. He stopped when he reached Mara Kestrel and the massive, scarred creature resting beside her, watching every approaching compact soldier with wary, calculating patience. "Sergeant, I need a report I can actually believe," he said, "because the one coming over the comm right now sounds impossible." Mara told him everything, from the first contact at the northern fence to the final, brutal fight that had turned an unstoppable weapon against its own creators. Renko listened without interrupting, watching the creature the entire time, recognizing in its wary stillness something he had seen before in soldiers who had survived things they were never meant to survive. "It was built from a human," he said finally, more statement than question. "Built to hunt us, and it couldn't finish the job because some part of what made it possible was never fully theirs to control in the first place." "That's what I think too," Mara said. "I don't know what to call it now. It's not what they made it to be. Not anymore." She looked down at the creature beside her, still healing, still watching, still choosing moment by moment to stay exactly where it had decided to stand. "I've been calling it Ash," she said. "Seemed fitting. Something that was supposed to end everything and instead started something else entirely." Renko studied the two of them for a long moment, the exhausted human sergeant and the engineered predator that had defied its own creators for her sake, and found, for the first time in a long career full of hard-won victories, something that felt almost like hope. "Then Ash comes with us," he said. "Every empire out there needs to understand exactly what happens when you try to build humanity's ending out of humanity's own strength." Compact medical teams spent the following days documenting Ash's physiology with a caution that gradually gave way to genuine scientific fascination, the creature tolerating scans and tests with a patience none of them had expected from something built for violence. Mara stayed close throughout most of it, less out of duty now and more because something about the arrangement had simply become natural, the two of them settling into an understanding neither fully explained aloud. "You know they're going to want to study every part of what makes you what you are," she told Ash one evening, sitting beside its enclosure as compact engineers finished installing proper medical equipment nearby. "I'm going to make sure that's all they do. Study. Nothing else." Ash made the low, familiar sound it had made back in that first quiet moment on the battlefield, and by now Mara understood it well enough to recognize something close to trust in it. Weeks turned into months as New Meridian settled into an uneasy but genuine peace, the first extended stretch without a Concord raid the colony had known in 3 years. Mara began working with Ash daily, not to train it the way the Concord once had, but to help it understand a world it had never truly been permitted to experience on its own terms. It learned to recognize her voice from across the colony's grounds, learned the particular rhythm of her footsteps, learned, slowly, the countless small signals humans used to communicate things words alone could never fully capture. Children in the colony, cautious at first, eventually grew bold enough to leave small offerings near its enclosure, scraps of food, hand-drawn pictures, the quiet, instinctive generosity of people who no longer saw a monster when they looked at it. Renko visited twice more over those months, each time bringing updated reports from Compact Command, each time finding Ash a little more settled, a little more clearly choosing this life over the one it had been built for. "Command wants to know if it would consider working alongside future defense operations," he told Mara during his second visit. "Not as a weapon, as a partner. The choice would be entirely its own, and entirely yours to help make." Mara considered the question for a long moment, watching Ash rest nearby in the afternoon sun, scars healed now, posture relaxed in a way it had never once been under Concord control. "I think," she said finally, "you'd have to ask it yourself. It's earned that much at least." News of what happened at Aldermoor moved through compact space far faster than official channels could properly manage. Colonists on a dozen frontier worlds trading half-accurate accounts of a conquered monster that had turned against its own masters to save a human sergeant. Some of those accounts exaggerated wildly. Most of them, strangely, undersold exactly how strange the true story actually was. Compact Command, faced with a public relations opportunity too significant to waste, authorized a full, carefully worded release of the confirmed facts within a month of the engagement, careful to protect operational details while still making the core truth unmistakably clear. Every conquered species watching that broadcast understood, immediately, exactly what message it was meant to send. News of what happened at Aldermoor moved through compact space far faster than official channels could properly manage. Colonists on a dozen frontier worlds trading half-accurate accounts of a conquered monster that had turned against its own masters to save a human sergeant. Some of those accounts exaggerated wildly. Most of them, strangely, undersold exactly how strange the true story actually was. Compact Command, faced with a public relations opportunity too significant to waste, authorized a full, carefully worded release of the confirmed facts within a month of the engagement, careful to protect operational details while still making the core truth unmistakably clear. Every conquered species watching that broadcast understood, immediately, exactly what message it was meant to send. On a border world far from Aldermoor, in territory claimed by an empire that had watched the Conquered's failure with quiet, calculating interest, a military analyst compiled her own private assessment of what the footage actually meant for anyone still considering bioweapons research aimed at humanity. They tried to distill an enemy into a weapon, and the weapon remembered where it came from, she wrote, attaching the report to a channel her superiors rarely bothered reading closely. I would recommend extreme caution before any of our own research divisions consider a similar approach. Humanity's resilience does not appear to be a trait you can safely extract and repurpose. Her recommendation would sit unread for months, filed alongside a dozen other reports concerning a species most of the galaxy still preferred to underestimate rather than study properly. It would not be the last time that particular mistake proved costly for someone. Aboard the retreating Concord vessel, Warden Architect Akira Vess filed her final report on the Hunter-class program, knowing it would likely end her career, and knowing she would file it honestly regardless. Recommendation, she wrote, immediate termination of all further Hunter-class development. The genetic foundation of this program was never a weakness to be refined away. It is the foundation itself, and it cannot be separated from what it ultimately chooses to become. Draxus read that report in silence, understanding at last. The mistake that had cost the Conquered its most expensive weapon and its most dangerous secret in a single night. Somewhere behind him, in the quiet dark of the ship's archives, the last recorded readings from Ashfang 7 scrolled past on an unattended screen, a record of 11 flawless kills, and one final, defining refusal. The Conquered Council received Vess's report 3 weeks later, alongside 11 other classified assessments from officers who had witnessed some portion of the Aldermoor engagement firsthand. Debate over the program's future stretched across 2 full council sessions, older members arguing the failure represented a single flawed unit rather than a fundamental flaw in the program's genetic foundation. Vess, called to testify in person, offered them the same blunt honesty she had put into her written report, refusing every opportunity to soften a conclusion she now believed completely. You cannot build a weapon designed to end a species out of that species' own blood and expect it to remain loyal to anyone but that species when it finally understands what it is, she told them. We proved that at Aldermoor. I would rather the Conquered learn from it than repeat it. One younger council member, less invested in the program's legacy than his older colleagues, asked the question that ultimately decided the debate. If we continue this program and succeed in producing a unit incapable of the deviation we witnessed at Aldermoor, what exactly will we have built? A weapon with no trace of the resilience that made the sample useful in the first place, or another unit destined for the same failure? No one on the council had a satisfying answer to that question, and in the absence of one, the Hunter-class program was formally suspended within the month, its remaining research assets quietly redistributed across other, less controversial divisions. Draxus retired from active field command shortly after, choosing a quiet administrative post far from any future decision involving humanity, a choice several of his former colleagues privately understood better than they ever said aloud. Vess remained with the Conquered, transferred to a research division with considerably less prestige and fewer opportunities for catastrophic failure, an outcome she found, to her own quiet surprise, easier to live with than she expected. She kept a single file from the Hunter-class program archived on a private terminal, the last recorded readings from Ashfang 7 neural core, the moment its choice had finally, irreversibly, become its own. She never showed it to anyone else, though she reviewed it occasionally. A private reminder of the exact moment 9 years of her life's work had revealed something about its subject that no amount of careful engineering had ever managed to erase. Some things, she had come to believe, simply could not be built out of a person without carrying some piece of that person forward, whether the builders intended it or not. New Meridian rebuilt slowly in the months that followed, its northern wall reinforced, its people a little more tired, and a little more certain that survival had never truly been in doubt, not entirely. Ash remained, healing, learning, choosing every day to stand beside the species it had once been sent to erase, a living reminder of exactly how badly an empire could misjudge the material it built its weapons from. Word of what happened at Aldermoor spread slowly across compact space, and more slowly still into the wider galaxy beyond it. One more uncomfortable lesson added to a growing list every empire now had to reckon with. You cannot build a weapon to kill humanity out of humanity itself, and expect it to remain only a weapon. Phase 7 complete.